have lived long enough to know that goodbyes at airports are rarely easy, but that day, something in my son's eyes unsettled me more than the usual pang of parting. Robert had always carried the air of a man balancing too many responsibilities, but as we walked him through the terminal toward his gate, I noticed a heaviness in his shoulders, the kind that spoke of more than deadlines or delayed flights. His phone calls had been clipped, his attention fragmented, and though I tried to dismiss it as work stress, deep down, a quiet unease stirred in me. My granddaughter, Bethany, clutched my hand tightly, her other arm wrapped around her stuffed rabbit, Mr. Carrots. She adored her father, and the thought of him leaving, even for a few days, made her anxious. But that wasn't what haunted her eyes as she watched him hand over his boarding pass and disappear toward security. There was fear in them. Real sharp fear that no child should know that. I bent down to reassure her, smoothing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Daddy will be back soon, sweetheart," I whispered. She leaned in close, her breath hot against my cheek. "Grandma, we can't stay here. We need to leave. Now." Her words pierced me more sharply than any alarm could. Children speak in exaggerations, yes. They worry, they imagine. But Bethany wasn't playing a game, and the tremble in her voice was not the dramatics of an 8-year-old. "What do you mean, darling?" I asked carefully, my heart beginning to thud. She darted her eyes around the terminal before whispering again. "Daddy told me, if anyone looks at us strange after he leaves, we should go to the bank. He said I had to remember numbers, and I did. Grandma, they're watching us." I froze, the hairs at the back of my neck rising. I wanted desperately to tell her she was wrong, that she had misunderstood. But then I followed her gaze across the bustling terminal. Two men stood by a column near the baggage claim exit. They weren't holding boarding passes. They weren't checking phones or luggage. Their eyes were on us, sharp and deliberate. The kind of stare that pinned you in place, that made you feel like prayed. My blood ran cold. "All right, sweetheart," I whispered, masking the terror clawing at me. "We'll do exactly what your daddy said. Stay close." I gripped her hand and forced myself to walk, not run through the crowd. My every instinct screamed to bolt, to snatch her up and flee, but I knew drawing attention would only quicken whatever danger was already circling us outside. The drizzle had turned the pavement slick. I hurried her to the car, fumbling with the keys, my fingers trembling. Sliding into the driver's seat, I risked one glance in the rearview mirror. The men had stepped outside too, scanning the lot. "Seatbelt on," I told Bethany, my voice more commanding than usual. She obeyed without question. The drive was a blur of wet streets and honking horns. I clung to Robert's instructions, the bank, numbers, a plan I had never been privy to. My son, my careful, composed son, had prepared his little girl for this moment. That alone told me how serious it was. Bethany sat in silence, clutching her rabbit. Every now and then, she would glance at me with wide, uncertain eyes. I reached across at a red light, giving her hand a squeeze. "We're all right, darling. We're together. That's what matters." When the bank finally loomed into view, an old building of marble and brass, it felt almost like a relic from another age. I parked as calmly as I could and ushered Bethany inside, pretending we were nothing more than a grandmother and child running an errand. The clerk behind the counter barely glanced up as I requested access to Robert's safe deposit box, sliding forward the key he had pressed into my hand months earlier. At the time I thought little of it. Now it felt like the only anchor we had. The descent into the vault was like stepping into another world. The air grew cooler, quieter, heavy with the scent of steel and dust. The clerk opened the compartment and withdrew, leaving us alone in that cavernous silence. My hands trembled as I pulled the small drawer free. Inside were 3 things: a prepaid phone, a sealed envelope, and a black notebook. With shaking fingers, I opened the envelope first. "Mom, if you're reading this, it means something has gone wrong. Take Bethany. Use the phone only when necessary. Follow the instructions in the notebook. Trust no one except the names listed inside. Go north to Cedar Lake. There's a cabin. You'll be safe there. Please, Mom, protect her." The words blurred as my eyes filled with tears. My son had anticipated this moment. He had known enough to prepare for the possibility of failure. And he had entrusted not only his daughter but me with the burden of keeping her safe. Bethany's small voice broke through my shock. "Is Daddy in trouble?" I folded the letter carefully, swallowing hard. "Your daddy is very brave, sweetheart. And we're going to help him by following exactly what he asked us to do. I tucked the phone and notebook into my bag, closed the box and locked it. My legs felt unsteady as we walked back up to the lobby, the ordinary murmur of the bank a cruel contrast to the storm inside me, and then I saw them, through the glass doors parked at the curb. The same two men. One lifted his phone to his ear, his eyes fixed on me. My breath caught. They hadn't lost us. They had followed us here. I tightened my grip on Bethany's hand. "Come on, love," I said briskly, forcing calm into my voice. "We're leaving." Her eyes widened, but she trusted me. Together we pushed through the heavy doors into the damp Chicago air. The city bustled on as if nothing were wrong, cars honking, people hurrying with umbrellas, the rhythm of life unbroken. But for us, everything had shifted. I was no longer simply a grandmother seeing her son off on a business trip. I was a guardian on the run, holding the hand of a child whose father had entrusted her life to me. As we reached the car, I glanced back. The men had stepped out of their vehicle. One spoke into his phone, the other scanning the street. A cold clarity settled over me. Fear no longer held me frozen. It propelled me forward. I could not falter. I could not question. Robert's instructions were our lifeline, and I would cling to them no matter what. I started the engine, merging into traffic with shaking hands. Bethany leaned against her seat, clutching Mr. Carrot's, her eyes searching mine for reassurance. "Grandma," she whispered, "are we really safe?" I reached over, squeezing her hand. "We will be, darling. I promise you we will be." And as the city lights blurred around us, I realized that promises were all I had left. Promises and the unyielding determination to keep her safe at any cost. Because sometimes, life doesn't wait for you to be ready. Sometimes it demands you be braver than you ever thought possible. And that night, as the rain streaked down the windshield and shadows followed close behind, I vowed I would not let fear decide our fate. The drive from the bank was tense, each red light stretching longer than it should, each passing car a potential threat. Bethany was quiet now, curled against the seat with Mr. Carrots tucked under her chin. Her earlier anxiety had evolved into a silent vigilance, and I couldn't fault her. By now she understood, more than most adults, the stakes of what we were doing. The directions Robert had provided were intricate, almost implausible. We were to avoid main roads, take side streets, alleyways, and service roads that wound around industrial parks and abandoned warehouses. The notebook held instructions so detailed, I could see the painstaking effort he had put into covering every possibility. He had thought of everything: escape routes, emergency contacts, fallback positions, except perhaps the toll it would take on the heart. Eventually, the urban sprawl began to thin. Buildings gave way to quiet residential streets, which in turn faded into narrow country lanes, wet with late spring rain and flanked by dense forests. The air smelled different here: pine, damp earth, and something faintly metallic, like the promise of rain yet to fall. The tension in my shoulders eased slightly. I was far from prying eyes now, and the cabin Robert had designated was only a few miles ahead. Bethany's small voice broke the silence. "Grandma, will we be safe there?" I hesitated, searching for words that wouldn't scare her further, then settled on honesty. "For now, darling, yes. That's why your daddy sent us there. It's a place where we can hide until it's safe to come out again." She nodded, her eyes wide and trusting. At 8 years old, she had endured more than any child should. And yet, she carried herself with a courage that made my chest ache with pride and sorrow all at once. When we finally turned onto the gravel driveway leading to Cedar Lake, the cabin came into view, a modest structure, almost rustic in its simplicity, yet with an air of preparedness that hinted at the care Robert had taken in choosing it. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, a small sign of life and warmth that somehow made the place seem less lonely. I parked carefully, keeping the car hidden behind a thick cluster of trees, just as Robert had instructed. Bethany slipped quietly from the car, her small hand in mine, and I guided her along the narrow path to the cabin. Each step felt heavier than the last. Every rustle in the underbrush seemed amplified in the stillness of the forest. The front door creaked open before I could knock. "Helena." Robert's voice, calm yet urgent, greeted me. My heart leapt at the sound. Behind him, Bethany's eyes lit up like sunrise. She ran, abandoning caution, and he caught her in his arms. The embrace was full of the kind of raw emotion that words could never capture. Relief, fear, love, all intertwined. "Daddy," she cried. Wrapping her arms tightly around his neck, he swung her gently, making her giggle despite the tension that hung in the air. "I've missed you too, Bug," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You've been so brave." I approached slowly, absorbing the reunion, letting them have this moment. Robert's eyes met mine briefly, a silent acknowledgement of what had brought us here, the danger, the uncertainty, and the trust placed in both of us to survive it. Inside, the cabin was small but meticulously organized. There were provisions, dried food, bottled water, first aid supplies, and a small wood stove that had already been lit. Beds were made, and clean linen smelled faintly of pine and soap. Robert had prepared for every eventuality, yet even with all his foresight, I knew the psychological weight of our situation would not be so easily mitigated. Once Bethany had calmed and set Mr. Carrots beside her on the bed, Robert gestured for me to follow him outside. The spring air was sharp and fresh, a contrast to the heavy tension inside. "Helena, I need to explain everything," he said, voice low and serious. "You've done exactly what I asked. You protected Bethany, followed the instructions, and you're here. But there's more. The danger isn't over." I nodded, trying to steel myself. "I know. They were following us from the bank. I saw them." Robert's expression darkened. "That's why this cabin is only temporary. There are layers to the plan. Safe houses, contingencies, and finally extraction to Canada. From there we move again. But I need you to understand, the people we're up against are relentless. They're well-funded, connected, and ruthless. If they can't reach me, they'll come after you." The words sank deep. Every instinct screamed at me, yet I remained outwardly composed. Bethany was still a child. She needed a grandmother who could hold the line. We spent the next hour unpacking essentials, organizing our belongings, and establishing a small routine. Robert emphasized caution, teaching me the nuances of surveillance awareness, signaling, and emergency communication. I had thought I was familiar with his meticulous nature, but the depth of his planning now revealed a mind capable of anticipating danger with almost prescient accuracy. As the sun began to dip behind the trees, casting long shadows across the cabin, there was a sudden knock at the door. My hand went instinctively to my hip, where I had tucked a small firearm Robert had insisted I carry. But before I could react, the door swung open to reveal Rachel, Robert's ex-wife and Bethany's mother. "Helena," she said, her voice tired but steady, raising a hand in greeting. "It's just me." Shock froze me momentarily. Rachel had moved to California after their divorce 2 years ago, with minimal involvement in Bethany's life. Occasional video calls and holiday visits were the extent of her parenting. And now, here she was in the middle of a forest miles from home. "Rachel?" I asked, disbelief thick in my voice. She dropped her backpack with a thud. "Robert contacted me 5 days ago. Explained everything. I've been traveling under a false name, using cash only, changing transportation every few hours. I'm sorry I couldn't reach you sooner." I lowered the rifle completely, confusion wearing within me. Her presence changed everything, introduced new possibilities, and complicated our fragile equilibrium. Bethany, sensing her mother's proximity, practically tumbled down the stairs toward her. "Mommy!" she cried, and Rachel knelt, arms open. The reunion was heartfelt, with all the joy and disbelief of long separation and peril intertwined. Once the initial emotions settled, we moved inside, where Rachel accepted coffee and began filling in gaps in my understanding. Robert had contacted her through an old, obscure email account, an address from before our marriages, completely untraceable. "He told you everything?" I asked cautiously. "About the money laundering, the weapons deals, all of it," she said. "He couldn't warn me directly. They were monitoring him too closely. But he trusted you to protect Bethany if he gave the right instructions." I absorbed this, heart-pounding. Betrayal, fear, and trust all mingled in a confusing whirlwind. My son had orchestrated an escape with layers of deception, relying on both me and his ex-wife to safeguard his child. "Where is he now?" I asked once Bethany was momentarily occupied. Rachel glanced toward the hallway. "He never went to London. The ticket was a diversion. He's in Canada, working with international authorities to track the offshore accounts. The reason he sent me here is we need to move, all of us, tonight." Tonight. My carefully cultivated calm shattered. Yes, Rachel said. The investigation has revealed connections beyond what even Robert anticipated. Government officials, foreign interests, all compromised. They've identified his family as leverage. There was an incident at my apartment in California. Men broke in, ransacked the place. Robert's contact in the FBI says they're narrowing the search, focusing on properties with family connections. This cabin is registered to James' estate. It's only a matter of time before they find it in the records. The magnitude of abandoning our lives, possibly permanently, hit me physically. But even in the fear, a single certainty anchored me. Protecting my family came before everything else. By dusk, we had packed essentials into backpacks, leaving the cabin to appear merely temporarily abandoned. Beds were left rumpled, dishes cleaned but not hidden. I helped Bethany bundle up. "Grandma, why at night?" "Because sometimes it's safer when people can't see you clearly," I explained, and she nodded, treating our desperate flight as a game of hide and seek. Rachel led us through the forest, a red-filtered headlamp casting just enough light to navigate. The night enveloped us, alive with owls and the rustle of small creatures. Bethany kept pace, fatigue creeping in, but Rachel lifted her when necessary, mother and daughter moving together with an efficiency born of necessity. Near dawn, a small clearing appeared, revealing the first hints of daylight. "We're making good time," Rachel said. Ahead lay a small hunting cabin where a contact would guide us across the border into Canada. As we approached, a woman's voice greeted us. "Robert said you'd be punctual." Recognition hit me like a blow. Diane Matthews, Robert's college girlfriend who had vanished years ago, now standing as our guide and protector. Inside, the cabin was prepared: water, energy bars, a satellite phone far beyond civilian technology. Diane's presence added another layer of complexity, but also hope. With practiced precision, she led us along faint game trails to the unmanned border section. The crossing was silent, almost anticlimactic, yet carried the weight of every choice that had led us here. Once in Canada, a nondescript SUV waited. Marcus, a man of quiet efficiency, drove us further north, avoiding main roads, through forests and rural highways, until finally, the safe house outside Montreal emerged. Smoke from the chimney, fresh linen, and the promise of a temporary sanctuary greeted us. Bethany ran to Robert, crying out. He caught her mid-leap, spinning her in relief. I followed slowly, absorbing the reunion, the layers of fear, strategy, and love intertwined. Inside, after Bethany was settled, we gathered by the fire. Robert, Diane, and I began piecing together the story of how he discovered the crimes, the depth of Global Meridian's operations, and the network of corruption that had forced us into this life on the RUN.IT was a world I had never imagined. An accountant turned whistleblower, a young girl used as a messenger, former lovers and secret contacts guiding us to safety, and the weight of truth pressing down on all of us as midnight approached. Exhaustion claimed me. Robert showed me to a bed, lingering in the doorway. "I never properly thanked you," he said quietly. "You did extraordinary things today. Protecting Bethany, delivering evidence, evading professionals. You were remarkable." "I'm her grandmother," I replied simply, and as I drifted to sleep in this temporary sanctuary, I realized that what truly mattered had not been left behind. My family, my values, my courage, they remained intact, and they would carry us into the uncertain future awaiting in New Zealand, where reinvention and survival would merge into a life none of us could have imagined. The first morning in the Montreal safe house brought a deceptive calm. Sunlight filtered through the thick curtains, falling in gentle strips across the hardwood floor. Outside, the forest stretched in every direction, a green and gold sea of tranquility that belied the chaos of the previous days. Bethany awoke first, blinking sleep from her eyes and clutching Mr. Carrots tightly. Her small voice carried through the quiet cabin. "Grandma, where's Daddy?" "He's right here, Bug," I said softly, rising from the chair by the fire. Robert appeared in the doorway, still adjusting to the comfort of a roof that didn't feel like a temporary shelter. The reunion had been tender but fleeting. Bethany, like all children, quickly sought stability and routine. Breakfast was simple, instant oatmeal, fruit, and bottled water, but the process of preparing it felt foreign. Normally, I had hours to plan, to make breakfast an event. Now it was fuel sustenance to face the next unknown. Rachel and Diane moved around the kitchen, efficiently arranging supplies for the day. Every action they took was precise, almost military in its execution, yet it carried an undercurrent of normalcy they tried desperately to maintain for Bettany's sake. Robert sat at the table, his hands wrapped around a steaming mug. He looked older than his years, the weight of responsibility etched across his face. "We don't have much time," he began, voice low. "The investigation is progressing faster than we anticipated. Some of the people we exposed are scrambling, and they're dangerous." I nodded, understanding more than I wanted to. "We knew it wouldn't be easy," I said. "But we're here, and we're ready to do what we have to do." Rachel placed Bettany's plate in front of her, kneeling to meet her eyes. "We need to talk about routines," she said gently. "Even here, even in hiding, structure is important. We'll need to set rules, schedules, normal things for her age so she feels safe." Bettany listened intently, a small frown forming as she processed the reality of her new environment. "But what about my school?" she asked quietly. Robert exchanged a glance with me. "School will be different," he explained. "For now, we're going to focus on learning at home. Once we're settled in New Zealand, she'll have proper classes. But for the moment, we adapt." The cabin had been chosen with care. It was insulated, self-contained, and strategically positioned to minimize detection. Yet the reality of our situation meant vigilance was constant. Every sound in the surrounding forest set my nerves on edge. Footsteps, snapping twigs, even the distant call of a bird made me flinch. Diane had insisted on a daily check-in system, timed communications with encrypted messages to a secure satellite connection. The technology was far beyond my understanding, but I trusted her expertise implicitly. By mid-morning, the adults gathered in the main room to discuss the plan in detail. A large map covered the wall, dotted with pins marking locations, routes, and potential hazards. Diane pointed to the northern border. "This is our exit point to Canada proper. After that, we'll move to the secondary safe house, where identities and documents are fully prepared." Robert added, "We have to remain mobile. Even here, staying too long in one place increases risk. The people we've exposed are resourceful. They'll be looking for patterns, for anything that ties back to us." Rachel's voice was calm but firm. "We also have to consider Bettany. We can't just disappear and leave her to constant fear. She needs moments of normalcy, even in hiding." I felt a pang of guilt. How much normalcy could we truly give her? Every day was measured in risk, every step calculated for safety. Yet, the child's resilience was astonishing. Bettany adapted with a mix of curiosity and pragmatism that belied her age. After the briefing, we split tasks. I oversaw inventory and organization of the safe house, checking food, medical supplies, and securing important documents. Rachel focused on Bettany, engaging her in educational exercises and physical activity to expend energy. Diane and Robert monitored communication channels, tracing leads and preparing contingencies for any unexpected developments. As I worked, my mind wandered back to the moment we had crossed the border. The invisible line, unmarked yet monumental, had shifted our reality. We were no longer in the United States. The pursuit still existed, but the legal jurisdiction had changed. That shift, small as it might seem to an outsider, represented a critical advantage. By afternoon, a routine began to form. Bettany played outside in a small clearing near the cabin under Rachel's watchful eye. I supervised from the window, noticing the way sunlight danced through the leaves, the way her laughter blended with the wind and the birds. For a brief moment, the tension eased. It was fleeting yet precious, a reminder of why we were enduring this life of uncertainty. Diane approached me, her expression serious. "Helena, we need to discuss contingencies. The people we've exposed aren't just dangerous, they're persistent. They have influence. If we're discovered here, we must have a plan to relocate immediately." I nodded, appreciating the gravity of her words. "How fast can we move if it comes to that?" "Within hours," she replied. "Secondary locations are prepped. Vehicles, routes, safe houses. Everything is synchronized. We'll disappear as quickly as we appeared. But the question isn't speed. It's timing and coordination. One wrong move and they'll know where to look." Robert joined us, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "We've planned for every scenario, Helena. Your role now is to maintain stability inside this house, Bettany's world. Outside, Diane and I handle the operational side." The afternoon waned into evening, and as the sky darkened, Diane suggested a perimeter check. We moved cautiously along the edges of the property, observing natural sightlines, noting points of concealment, and confirming that no signs of pursuit were evident. The forest, though peaceful, could conceal anyone. Every shadow felt heavier, every rustle suspicious. That night, as we settled in, I found myself alone with Robert by the fireplace. The warmth of the flames was comforting, yet the weight of reality pressed on both of us. "Robert," I began hesitantly, "how did you know you could trust Diane? After all these years, how did you even know she'd be available?" He sighed, the sound heavy with memory and experience. "We reconnected 3 years ago during an investigation of financial irregularities that intersected with Global Meridian. Diane's role was critical then, and when I realized the scope of what I'd uncovered, I reached out to her through secure channels. She agreed to help because she knew the stakes." "I see," I said, understanding the layers of loyalty and secrecy that now governed our lives. "And Rachel, how does she fit in this? After all this time, she's suddenly here, part of the plan." Robert glanced toward the hallway where Bethany's soft breathing drifted from her bedroom. "Bethany needs both her parents now more than ever. Rachel's presence stabilizes her, even if it complicates things for us operationally." I nodded, accepting the truth. Family dynamics had been reshaped by danger, trust, and necessity. Our priorities had shifted entirely. Night deepened, and the cabin grew quiet. Bethany slept soundly between Rachel and me, a rare moment of peace. I reflected on the days that had passed, the airport warning, the chase, the crossing, the safe house. The world we had known was gone, replaced by a life measured in survival, vigilance, and cautious hope. Sleep came fitfully. Dreams were haunted by shadows and whispers, by the faces of those who would do us harm. Yet in the midst of unease, I felt a glimmer of resolve. We had survived. We were together, and in that unity lay strength. The next morning, Diane called a meeting. The plan was to remain at the safe house for 48 hours to allow the most immediate threats to dissipate before moving to the secondary location in the outskirts of Montreal. She provided details of the move, emphasizing timing, routes, and communication protocols. Everything was designed to minimize exposure while maximizing safety. Bethany was involved as much as possible. We explained the need to stay hidden, why we couldn't tell anyone where we were, and how important it was to follow instructions precisely. Her understanding was remarkable, though her small hands trembled slightly when she accepted the seriousness of the situation. As the day progressed, we divided responsibilities further. I oversaw Bethany's schooling and recreational activities, ensuring she maintained routines that gave her some semblance of normal childhood life. Robert and Diane coordinated monitoring, scanning communication channels for any signs of movement or detection. Rachel handled domestic stability, preparing meals, organizing supplies, and providing emotional support for Bethany. Despite the relative calm, the tension never fully lifted. Every sound outside, every unexpected movement in the forest, carried the weight of potential threat. Even the distant call of a bird could trigger a moment of vigilance, a reminder that our freedom was fragile. By evening, Diane initiated a full operational check. Equipment was tested, routes were reviewed, and contingency plans rehearsed mentally. It was meticulous, exhausting, and absolutely necessary. Test night fell again. I stood on the cabin porch, watching the shadows of the forest stretch endlessly before me. I felt the weight of my choices, the decision to follow Robert's instructions, to protect Bethany, to trust people I barely knew. And yet, I also felt a sense of empowerment. I was no longer a passive observer in this world of espionage and danger. I was an active participant, capable of protecting my family and navigating threats that most could not even imagine. This night, like all nights now, was a test of endurance, of patience, and of faith. But I was ready. For Bethany, for Robert, for Rachel, and for myself. We had survived the first leg of a journey that would reshape our lives, and tomorrow would bring the next challenge. Because in this new reality, there was no turning back. Only forward, into the uncertain, dangerous, and extraordinary world we now inhabited. The next morning dawned cold and crisp, the kind of clarity that made every detail of the forest seem sharper, almost too vivid. Mist hovered over the treetops, lending the woods an ethereal quality, but I knew better than to be lulled by beauty. Danger didn't wear a disguise, It hid quietly in the normal, the mundane. Bettany was up early, as usual, eager for breakfast and the promise of a day with routines, even if those routines were now shaped by secrecy. She sat at the small table, drawing in her notebook, creating worlds that were hers alone. Rachel moved beside her, guiding her through simple math exercises, reading comprehension, and spelling tests. The normalcy was a fragile shield, yet it worked. For a few precious hours, Bettany laughed and smiled. Forgetting the shadows that lingered beyond the cabin walls, I watched them, the warmth of the morning sun filtering through the window, and felt a pang of both relief and sorrow. Relief because she seemed safe, and sorrow for the world we'd taken from her so abruptly. At 7, she should have known only school, friends, and birthday parties, not clandestine cross-border operations and shadowed threats. Robert appeared in the doorway, holding the morning briefing sheets Diane had left on the counter. "I need to go through these before breakfast," he said, voice quiet but tense. "We've received intelligence on the remaining targets, people connected to Global Meridian who are scrambling now that their top-level collaborators are exposed." I followed him into the small study area. Maps, printed emails, satellite imagery, and lists of names were scattered across the desk. Each sheet carried a weight that made my stomach knot. Robert's hands moved deliberately, tracing lines, checking off names, noting potential threats. "They're desperate," he said, almost to himself. "And desperate people do unpredictable things." I leaned over his shoulder, scanning the documents. The breadth of corruption was staggering. Shell companies, offshore accounts, clandestine shipments, bribed officials, and military contractors operating with impunity. All of it linked, all of it dangerous. The magnitude of what Robert had uncovered, and the people he'd exposed, was beyond anything I could have imagined. "Does Diane know all of this?" I asked. "Yes," Robert replied. "She has access to our secure network. She's been monitoring communications, tracking movements, and coordinating contingency plans. Without her, we wouldn't have made it this far." It was reassuring, but it didn't diminish the fear that lingered in every corner of my mind. Fear of discovery, fear for Bettany, fear for Rachel, fear for myself. Even in this safe house, there was no true sanctuary. Safety was a temporary illusion measured in hours, not days. After breakfast, Diane called a meeting. She had prepared a detailed itinerary for the next 2 days, including checkpoints, supply runs, and route adjustments to maintain security. Her presence was commanding, her instructions precise. "We'll be moving again soon," she said. "The people we've exposed will be trying to trace connections. Even a single slip, email, purchase, movement could give them the edge they need." Bettany, sitting quietly beside Rachel, looked up with innocent curiosity. "Are we moving far?" she asked. "Yes, Bug," I said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "We're going to a place where you can play safely, where no one can find us." Her relief was palpable, but I knew it was temporary. Children sense tension even when adults try to mask it. I caught a glimpse of the worry in her small eyes, a reflection of the fear we all carried but rarely voiced. The day was spent preparing for the move. We packed supplies, food, water, clothes, documents, and emergency kits into waterproof duffels. Every item was checked and rechecked. Diane emphasized redundancy. Every critical item had a backup. She explained why each choice mattered, the consequences of failure, the precision required to remain undetected. As the afternoon sun waned, I took a moment to walk the perimeter of the property alone. The forest was alive with subtle sounds, the rustle of leaves, distant bird calls, the snap of twigs underfoot. Each noise heightened my awareness. Every shadow seemed to conceal eyes. My mind replayed the airport warning, the frantic journey to the safe house, and the crossing into Canada. How close had we come to being intercepted? How many steps away had disaster been? The sun dipped below the horizon, and the safe house lights flickered on. Diane and Robert gathered us for a final briefing before nightfall. The route to the secondary safe house was intricate, winding through less traveled roads, hidden paths, and forest trails. The goal was to minimize detection while maintaining efficiency. "Timing is critical," Diane said. "We move under the cover of night. Any delay, any hesitation could expose us." Bettany's small hand slipped into mine. "I'll be brave," she whispered, her voice both determined and tender. "You already are, Bug," I said, squeezing her hand. "Bravery isn't about not feeling fear. It's about facing it anyway. The night arrived with a heavy cloak of stars. Diane, Robert, and Marcus checked vehicles, verified equipment, and ensured communication channels were operational. Rachel helped Bethany dress warmly, layering clothes for insulation against the night chill. I oversaw the final preparations, double-checking packs, confirming supplies, and mentally rehearsing the escape route by 10 p.m. Everything was ready. We moved quietly, slipping into the forest along the marked trail. The familiar sounds of nocturnal life surrounded us. Owls, rustling leaves, distant animal calls, but the danger made every sound sharper, more urgent. The journey was grueling. Bethany, initially enthusiastic, began to tire, and I carried her for portions of the trek. Rachel alternated with me, lifting her onto her back, speaking softly to keep her calm. Diane led, navigating with precision while Robert stayed close behind, monitoring the rear. Every step, every breath, every movement was calculated for safety. Hours passed in near silence, punctuated only by the occasional whisper of instructions. The forest became denser, more challenging, yet Diane's experience shone through. She guided us along paths invisible to an untrained eye, avoiding obstacles and natural hazards with effortless grace. Near dawn, we reached a small clearing. Diane checked her watch and nodded. 45 minutes to the secondary safe house, she whispered. Stay alert, stay quiet. The secondary safe house was modest but secure. It offered multiple escape routes, secure communication capabilities, and the first real sense of stability we had felt since leaving the cabin. Inside, beds were made, supplies stocked, and a small generator provided power. The relief was immediate but tempered by the knowledge that our journey was far from over. Bethany slept almost immediately, her exhaustion outweighing her curiosity. Rachel and I stayed with her for a moment, watching the rise and fall of her chest, grateful for this fleeting sense of peace. Robert and Diane moved to the main room, beginning operational planning for the coming weeks. Routes, supplies, communication protocols, all meticulously detailed and accounted for. The weight of responsibility on their shoulders was immense, yet they moved with calm efficiency. I took a moment for myself, sitting by the window and looking out at the surrounding woods. The forest was beautiful, serene, and terrifying all at once. It was a reminder that life outside our control could be both nurturing and perilous. And yet, in the midst of uncertainty, one thing remained constant. Our family, our unity, and our commitment to survive together. As night fell, we gathered for a quiet dinner. Conversation was light, almost mundane, a deliberate attempt to maintain normalcy. Bethany asked about the stars, about the trees, about animals we might see during the day. Her curiosity was a balm, a reminder that life could still hold wonder, even in the shadow of danger. After dinner, Diane pulled me aside. Helena, there's something you need to understand. The people we've exposed, they're not going to stop. Every move we make will be monitored, every action scrutinized. We have to remain vigilant at all times. I understand, I said, meeting her gaze. But we're ready. We've adapted. We can do this. She nodded, a flicker of respect in her eyes. Good. Because the next phase is going to test all of us, physically, mentally, and emotionally. But I have confidence. You, your son, Rachel, and Bethany, you've proven capable. That night, as I lay in the small bedroom, the weight of the past weeks pressed down on me. Every memory, the airport warning, the cross-border escape, the hidden threats, the reunions, mingled with fear, hope, and determination. I realized that survival was not just about evading danger. It was about resilience, adaptability, and trust. Bethany slept peacefully, Rachel rested beside her, and Robert and Diane worked tirelessly in the main room. We were scattered across the house, yet united by necessity, by love, and by the shared goal of survival. And that moment, I understood a profound truth. No matter the danger, no matter the uncertainty, we had already become capable of facing whatever lay ahead. The forest outside was vast, unknown, and filled with shadows, but inside we carried light. Light born of family, of courage, of unyielding resolve. And tomorrow we would continue forward, into the challenges that awaited, stronger and more united than ever. The next morning brought with it a gray, heavy sky, as if the clouds themselves carried the weight of our past weeks. A low mist lingered over the fields surrounding the secondary safe house, and even the mundane sounds of a rural morning, the distant crowing of a rooster, the occasional bark of a dog, felt sharp and charged, as though nature itself were aware of the tension that hung over us. Bethany stirred first, her small face peeking over the edge of the bed. She had slept well, but the briefest shadow of uncertainty crossed her features when she realized we weren't in our familiar home. "Where are we now?" she asked quietly, still rubbing sleep from her eyes. "You're safe, sweetheart," I said, smoothing her hair back from her face. "That's what matters. Everything else can wait until we have to worry about it." Rachel sat on the edge of the bed beside her, quietly brushing her daughter's hair. The intimacy of that moment, mother and daughter reunited under extraordinary circumstances, was almost enough to make me forget the peril surrounding us. Almost. The morning was a quiet, meticulous dance of preparation. Diane had already begun reviewing maps and coordinating routes for the coming weeks. "We can't stay here long," she reminded us, her tone crisp but calm. "Even in rural areas, patterns emerge. Someone could notice unusual traffic, deliveries, or even the absence of neighbors and alert the wrong people." Robert joined us, holding a thick folder of updated intelligence. His face was etched with concentration. "We need to split our tasks," he said. "Rachel, you'll be responsible for Bethany's routines, schoolwork, meals, emotional check-ins. Helena, you'll oversee logistics, food, supplies, and ensuring our communication channels remain secure. Diane and I will handle security and route planning." The practical clarity of his instructions brought some sense of control, yet the magnitude of the work ahead was impossible to ignore. We were not just surviving, we were managing a mobile fortress, each of us a critical component. After breakfast, Diane led a brief training session. While she insisted we weren't in immediate danger, she made it clear we could not underestimate the skill and determination of our adversaries. She demonstrated basic surveillance detection techniques, ways to move silently through terrain, and methods to communicate without leaving a digital trail. Even Bethany absorbed some of these lessons with childlike eagerness, though in simplified terms. "Like a spy game," she whispered, eyes shining. The day passed with careful efficiency. We practiced routines, checked gear, and rehearsed contingencies. Yet even amidst this disciplined effort, the underlying fear remained. A low hum that accompanied every thought, every movement. Mid-afternoon, Diane requested a private conversation. She led me and Robert outside, away from Bethany and Rachel. The crisp air carried a weighty stillness. "There's been a development," Diane began, her eyes shadowed with concern. "Someone traced the initial leak back further than we anticipated. We're not just dealing with exposed players at Global Meridian. Someone else knows about Robert's activities." Robert's expression darkened. "How far? How serious?" "The individual or group has resources and influence," Diane said carefully. "They're covert, patient, and methodical. They could act anywhere at any time, but they haven't yet. That gives us a small window." I felt my stomach tighten. "And you think they're targeting us?" "Yes," Diane admitted. "They'll try to leverage our family if they can't get Robert directly. It's why maintaining mobility and secrecy is critical, and why we need to consider relocation again, sooner rather than later." The weight of her words pressed heavily on me. It wasn't enough to hide in remote houses, travel cautiously, or rely on loyal contacts. We were in a game with unseen adversaries, each move potentially fatal. Back inside, the atmosphere was tense but outwardly calm. Bethany and Rachel were drawing quietly, the normalcy of the activity both comforting and surreal. I joined them briefly, sliding into the rhythm of the day, but my mind constantly returned to Diane's warning. By evening, we began packing essentials for another move. Diane emphasized speed and discretion. "We travel at night. We carry only what's necessary. Any delay increases exposure risk." As darkness fell, I helped Bethany into her small backpack, ensuring her favorite blanket and notebook were tucked securely. She looked up at me, eyes wide. "Are we going far this time?" "Yes, Bug," I whispered. "Far enough to stay safe." Rachel and Diane led the way, Robert and I following, our movements synchronized and deliberate. The forest swallowed us in shadow, each step measured, silent. We used narrow trails and faint animal paths, Diane guiding us with uncanny precision. Hours into the trek, fatigue began to creep in. Bethany grew restless, her small frame heavy against my back, and Rachel alternated carrying her, whispering soft reassurances. Even Robert, usually tireless, showed the strain, But his resolve never wavered. During a brief pause near a stream, Diane pulled me aside again. "There's another factor you need to be aware of," she said in a low voice. "Someone within our network may not be as loyal as we thought. We've detected anomalies in communications. Small discrepancies, subtle delays. It's not concrete yet, but you need to be cautious. Trust your instincts." I felt a chill. Betrayal from within? The thought was terrifying. Yet Diane's calm, analytical demeanor reassured me that we could handle it. "We'll be careful," I said, my voice firm despite the unease curling in my stomach. We resumed the trek, the night deepening around us. The forest seemed alive with eyes, sounds sharper, shadows deeper. Every rustle of leaves, snap of twigs, and distant animal cry felt amplified by tension and anticipation. Dawn. We reached a small clearing where a nondescript vehicle waited. Marcus, ever silent and vigilant, greeted us and helped load our packs. Diane coordinated quickly, scanning the area for potential observers before giving the signal to move. The drive was slow but deliberate, avoiding main roads, checkpoints, and populated areas. Rachel and Bethany slept, exhausted from the night's journey. I kept watch, eyes scanning every curve, tree line, and road junction. Hours later, we arrived at a secluded safe house, its location chosen for maximum security and minimal exposure. The structure was modest, but it offered multiple exit routes, secure communications, and sufficient space for us to regroup. Inside, the team immediately began assessing the property, establishing routines, and reinforcing security measures. For the first time in days, I allowed myself a moment to breathe. Bethany was safe, asleep, her small chest rising and falling steadily. Rachel moved about quietly, preparing meals and organizing supplies. Robert and Diane coordinated plans for the coming weeks, their expertise evident in every action. Yet, despite the temporary reprieve, a lingering tension remained. The warnings, the threats, and the unseen eyes waiting in the shadows were never far from my mind. Survival required vigilance, adaptability, and unwavering unity. As night fell, we gathered for a quiet meal, the conversation muted, careful. The gravity of our situation was never far from the surface, yet we attempted to maintain semblances of normalcy. For Bethany, for each other, for our sanity. Afterward, Diane pulled Robert aside to discuss operational details. I remained with Rachel and Bethany, observing the delicate balance between fear and hope. Bethany's innocence was a beacon, a reminder of why we endured the hardship, why we continued despite exhaustion, danger, and uncertainty. Later, as I lay in the small bedroom, I reflected on the past weeks. Every decision, every risk, every act of courage had brought us here. We were not just surviving. We were adapting, evolving, and preparing for whatever came next. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, and new threats. But in that moment, I allowed myself a measure of quiet resolve. We were together, we were prepared, and above all, we were determined, because in the shadows of danger, the unseen threats, and the betrayals yet to be revealed, one truth remained immutable. Our family would endure, and we would face the unknown together with courage, strategy, and love as our guide. And with that, I closed my eyes, knowing that the journey ahead, though perilous, was one we would meet head-on, united, vigilant, and unbroken. The days that followed were a careful balance of vigilance, preparation, and tentative normalcy. In this remote Canadian safe house, we established a routine, though even routine carried the tension of unseen eyes. Morning light brought the scent of pine and frost, but it also reminded us that each day spent in one place increased our exposure. Bethany adapted faster than any of us anticipated. She turned the small living room into a classroom, with Rachel guiding her lessons, using textbooks and digital materials Diane had secured. Despite everything, she maintained a childlike curiosity, asking questions about birds, the trees, and the occasional rabbit that ventured near our perimeter. Those moments of innocence were precious, a fragile reminder of why we were enduring this extraordinary life. I took to patrolling the perimeter alongside Diane, moving through dense underbrush and rocky inclines, assessing lines of sight, and identifying potential vulnerabilities. Diane's training was precise, methodical, and relentless. Every movement was calculated, every step measured. She pointed out subtle signs, broken branches, footprints, faint tire marks that could signal surveillance or potential intrusion. Never underestimate the small details, she reminded me. Predators, whether human or animal, leave traces. You learn to read them, anticipate them, and plan accordingly. Robert and Marcus focused on communication channels and intelligence updates. Robert's background in finance gave him an uncanny ability to track patterns, connections, and anomalies. It wasn't glamorous work. Long hours analyzing financial trails, cross-referencing intercepted communications, but it was the backbone of our survival. Each discovery, each confirmation, fortified our position. One evening, as the last light of dusk filtered through the windows, Diane called us together. "There's movement we need to address," she said, her voice low, urgent. Not immediately threatening, but it's evidence that someone is watching more closely. Could be scouts, informants, or automated surveillance. Either way, we need to adjust. Adjust we did. New security perimeters were established. Routes for potential evacuation were refined. Redundant communication channels were created. Everything was layered with contingencies, no detail too small, no precaution unnecessary. Despite these preparations, the tension never fully lifted. Bettany, perceptive beyond her years, occasionally asked pointed questions. "Grandma, why do people want to find Daddy?" I'd kneel to her level, choosing my words carefully. "Some people make bad choices and try to hurt others to get what they want. Your daddy did something brave and now some people are angry about it. But we are safe, and we are together, and that's what matters." She seemed satisfied with the answer, returning to her drawing or lesson, but I knew her young mind absorbed more than I could gauge. Weeks passed. Each night, Diane and Robert monitored the outskirts, noting changes in activity. Each day, Rachel reinforced Bettany's sense of stability, blending safety measures with a semblance of normal childhood life. And each night, I wrote lists, checked supplies, and prepared contingencies. One night, a breakthrough arrived. Robert had intercepted communication from a high-level contact in the U.S. intelligence network, a confirmation that several key figures involved in the Global Meridian scandal had been detained. The evidence was irrefutable. Arrests, seizures, and international cooperation were underway. "It's the turning point," Robert said, voice tight with relief and exhaustion. "We're no longer just reacting. We can start planning the next phase." Diane nodded. "But caution remains paramount. They'll try to reclaim influence, delay proceedings, and possibly target associates. Until the legal processes are complete, we remain invisible." With that, we turned our attention to preparing for long-term relocation. New identities, passports, and documentation were prepared discreetly through channels Diane trusted implicitly. She instructed us on cultural nuances, legal requirements, and routines to establish our cover in New Zealand. Even Bettany's schooling was prepped for seamless continuation. Yet, in the quiet moments, the emotional toll surfaced. Rachel occasionally allowed herself to cry, mourning lost years with Bettany and the life she'd abandoned. Robert carried a weighty combination of guilt, responsibility, and relief, knowing his actions had protected countless lives, but also endangered those he loved most. I felt my own grief in private, memories of my old home, friends, and community, all of which I'd left behind, but I tempered it with resolve. Our family, our unity, and our safety mattered more than any attachment to past comforts. The night before departure, we gathered in the living room. Diane reviewed the plan one final time, detailing routes, contingencies, and security measures. Marcus checked the vehicle, ensuring readiness for transport. Robert checked Bettany's supplies. While Rachel quietly arranged her daughter's belongings, I looked around at this assembled group, thinking about the journey we'd endured. Betrayal, danger, and fear had defined the past weeks, yet resilience, courage, and cooperation had carried us through. "Tomorrow we start a new chapter," Diane said, her tone firm yet reflective. "Remember, we move as one unit. Trust each other, trust the plan, and trust yourselves." Bettany, exhausted but alert, hugged Rachel and me tightly. "I'm ready," she said simply, the kind of clarity only a child can offer. Dawn broke with muted gray light. We moved quietly, efficiently, with Marcus driving the first leg toward a remote airstrip. The route avoided populated areas, and each checkpoint was calculated to minimize exposure. Even the faintest trace of our presence had been accounted for. To the airstrip, a small aircraft awaited, its pilot briefed and ready. Diane coordinated final movements, ensuring no digital or physical evidence would compromise our departure. The aircraft lifted silently into the sky, leaving behind the forest, the safe house, and Canada itself below us, The land unfolded in endless stretches of green and brown, rivers and lakes glinting faintly under the sun. I allowed myself a moment to reflect. Our lives had been irrevocably changed, yet we were alive, united, and determined. The flight was tense but uneventful. Diane, sitting near the cockpit, monitored communications. Robert sat beside me, his hand resting briefly on mine, a silent acknowledgement of shared endurance. Rachel and Bettany were in the rear, Bettany finally drifting to sleep, exhausted yet comforted by the sense of movement and forward momentum. Hours later, the aircraft descended over New Zealand. The landscape was breathtaking. Rolling green hills, scattered forests, and distant mountains. The property we had been assigned was modest but secure. A small farm with a house, outbuildings, and sufficient acreage to remain private. As we landed and stepped onto solid ground, I felt a surge of cautious optimism. This was a fresh start, a place to rebuild and establish permanence, even amidst uncertainty. The first weeks in New Zealand were consumed with establishing routines, integrating into the community under new identities, and securing our long-term safety. Bettany adapted quickly, making new friends in school while maintaining her routines with Rachel and me. Robert worked discreetly, monitoring developments related to the Global Meridian case, and ensuring our continued security. Diane's guidance remained invaluable, providing counsel and oversight even as she began transitioning responsibilities to us. Even in this new life, shadows of the past lingered, moments of unease when unfamiliar sounds made us tense, or a sudden sense of being observed. Yet those fears were tempered by the tangible reality of safety, the tangible presence of family, and the certainty that we had survived every danger thrown our way. Months passed. Reports of continued legal proceedings filtered through Robert's contacts. The major players were facing justice. Our efforts and the bravery of countless allies had made a tangible difference. We allowed ourselves cautious celebration, though tempered by the understanding that vigilance was never complete through it all. Bettany remained the center of our focus. Her laughter, curiosity, and resilience were constant reminders of what we fought to protect. Rachel and I worked to bridge the years lost, forming a relationship that was deepened not by circumstance but by necessity, honesty, and care. Robert and I shared moments of quiet reflection, a mutual recognition of sacrifice and courage, and a subtle unspoken pride in one another. As the sun set over the green hills of our new home, I stood outside breathing the cool, crisp air. I felt the weight of the past, yes, but also the promise of the future. We had endured peril, faced betrayal, and navigated danger at every turn. And yet here we were, alive, united, and ready to build a new life together. In that moment, I understood fully what Robert had always meant when he spoke of strength. It was not merely the ability to endure, but the capacity to act decisively, to protect, to adapt, and to love fiercely in the face of uncertainty. I looked over at my family, Rachel adjusting Bettany's jacket, Robert surveying the property, Diane giving a quiet nod of approval, and I knew we were more than survivors. We were a team forged in crisis, tempered by danger, and bound by loyalty and love. Whatever challenges awaited, we would meet them together. And for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to feel a profound sense of peace. Not the absence of danger, but the assurance that we had faced the storm, navigated its treacherous currents, and emerged intact. This was more than survival. This was living fully and fiercely, in the aftermath of peril, and I knew that whatever came next, we would face it unbroken, because family was our compass, courage our map, and love our guiding light.